Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and as you can see from the sparse background, I am now in my new apartment in Hagerstown. And today I will continue my conversation on pedagogy of the oppressed. Now we are in the fourth chapter, and the four anti-dialogical aspects of life that Freire is discussing in the beginning part of this chapter, we are on the last one, and that is the cultural invasion. In the previous video, we had ended the video on the discussion of what happens when the trainers of any given social, even space where they are trying to actually help people, when they are asked a lot of questions, they revert back to authority because they are afraid of confronting what they have internalized and what they are trying to impart. And today, what I'm going to read, it's really a brief reading, is about the participants of any such workshop, because they are also determined by the system within which they exist. So this group of educated people who are trying to help people in the street and people to whom help is being proffered because of cultural invasion and because their sense of the world is overwritten by that, both see the world from the assumptions of that particular dominant culture. And then towards the end of these passages that I read, Freire is developing a new mode of revolutionary praxis, which is really important for understanding the book. But it's also, I think, really important in understanding generally what constitutes a revolution and how change is made. So let's read, and then I'll come back and talk about it a little more. This same retreat occurs, though on a smaller scale, among men of the people who have been ground down by the concrete situation of oppression and domesticated by charity. One of the teachers of Full Circle, which carried out a valuable educational program in New York City under the coordination of Robert Fox, relates the following incident. A group in a New York ghetto was presented a coded situation showing a big pile of garbage on a street corner, the very same street where the group was meeting. One of the participants said at once, "I see a street in Africa or Latin America." "And why not in New York?" asked the teacher. "Because we are the United States and that can't happen here." Beyond a doubt, this man and some of his comrades who agreed with him were retreating from a reality so offensive to them that even to acknowledge that reality was threatening. For an alienated person conditioned by a culture of achievement and personal success, to recognize his situation as objectively unfavorable seems to hinder his own possibilities of success. In the case cited, and in that of the professionals, the determining force of the culture which develops the myths men subsequently internalize is evident. In both cases, the culture of the dominant class hinders the affirmation of men as beings of decision. Neither the professionals nor the discussion participants in the New York slums talk and act for themselves as active subjects of the historical process. None of them are theoreticians or ideologues of domination. On the contrary, they are effects in which in turn become causes of domination. This is one of the most serious problems the revolution must confront when it reaches power. This stage demands maximum political wisdom, decision, and courage from the leaders who, for this very reason, must have sufficient judgment not to fall into irrationally sectarian positions. Professional women and men of any specialty university graduates or not, are individuals who have been determined from above by a culture of domination which has constituted them as dual beings. If they had come from the lower classes, this miseducation would be the same, if not worse. These professionals, however, are necessary to the reorganization of the new society. And since many among them, even though afraid of freedom and reluctant to engage in humanizing action, are in truth more misguided than anything else, they not only could be, but ought to be reclaimed by the revolution. So, in the beginning of the passage, this same retreat, the retreat that he is talking about, is what I discussed in the previous video, and that was the retreat into the pre-established norm by those who are trying to help people and train them. They retreat back to the norm. Similarly, the participants of any workshop or any organizational meeting where the worldview that people have internalized, culturally speaking, when it's brought to question or when they are asked to reflect about it, they also retreat into the pre-established views of their own lives, which they themselves have not determined, but which they associate with. They retreat to that. So the example is from workshops that Mary Cole, the author of Life in the City, it was a book published in 1968, and it's available on archive.org. I'll post a link there, and there is a reference to Robert Fox, who was a Catholic priest and who wrote the foreword to the book. Now, this exercise was being done in New York City, and where the participants were shown an image, right? A coded image. Remember chapter 3 where we develop educational tools, and one part of it is to have pictorial images of the world in which we live. So that the people can see their own experience objectively as a coded form. So maybe the purpose was the same. So they are shown an image of a street with litter and garbage. But since the educational work of revolution has not been done yet, they associate it with the stereotypical places in their mind, just as the dominant groups in their world would, and that is Africa, Latin America, because it couldn't be United States, even though they might have passed by it. That is what he's trying to highlight, is that when cultural invasion has overwritten our idea of what constitutes life, and when we associate our sympathies and preferences to the dominant group, we stopped seeing the world from the point of view of our own experience. And an act of revolution or a revolutionary praxis must do that. And that is what he calls the cultural revolution. Right? The cultural revolution, which he will theorize further in this chapter, right? It cannot be done when revolution has happened. It must be a process while revolutionary praxis is unfolding. That's an important thing to keep in mind. But let's say if the revolution has succeeded, then a room must be created in that. And this is an insight which we saw in chapter 2 as well, I think. But here, this is where he's creating space for all those who, let's say, Mao had excluded. You know, famously the academics and people who weren't workers and peasants were humiliated. But what Freire is saying is, just as the oppressed are overdetermined by the dominant system, so are the educated people. So are the people who have gone to the universities. They are also overdetermined by the cultural invasion that manipulates them. So the revolutionary praxis then must leave the door open by declaring that if you are sympathetic to our cause, if you are willing to learn, come join us, for we need you to build this new world. Now, this has been hinted out throughout the book, especially I think in chapter 2 as well as in chapter 3, where he says that this room must be there for the previous people who must have been part of the cultural elite to come and join the people, not on their own terms, but as active participants, as participants who come with humility and learn along with others. But towards the end of this passage, which I just finished, what he is saying is, and I repeat, and since many among them, even though afraid of freedom and reluctant to engage in humanizing action, by now we mean what humanizing action is, right? Humanizing action through education and praxis, where everyone can live their full humanity and live freely, right? That not only could be, but ought to be reclaimed by the revolution, that they must be given an opportunity to come and be part of the revolution and maybe undo the way of looking at the world and at their own people that has been overdetermined through acts of cultural invasion, through the educational system, through the elite system that existed prior to the revolution. So just this brief insight is crucial for revolutionary praxis, but also for education, right? Those of us who educate, those of us who have knowledge, when we take that knowledge to the street, to the villages, and talk to the people, when they ask us questions, practical questions about the world, we should not revert back to the knowledge that constructed us and say, well, this is not how things are done. We must be willing to bring our own idea of what constitutes good and bad, what constitutes knowledge to crisis. And we must then, with the people, be willing to explore what aspects of our understanding of the world, what aspect of what we know is determined by the interests of those in power. So these are some of the few words about chapter 4. We are still on cultural invasion, which is the fourth anti-dialogic practice that he talks about. After we finish cultural invasion, then we will go into 4 liberatory practices that he offers as a counterweight to these anti-dialogic practices that any dominant system needs and uses to create the world in which we live, or to create the world that suits the dominant people. That's all. Thank you so much for your patience with me. Thank you so much for this wonderful journey with me into the world of the pedagogy of the oppressed. I hope to finish this series soon, and I think when we are done, it will be on this channel and on the internet, if not the most comprehensive and well explained, but at least one of the, an effort that kind of at least says that we took a chance and read the book and talked about it and took our time in doing so. So see you next time. Stay safe, take care of each other, and as always, from me to you, peace and love.